Moin Moin!
Und herzlich willkommen zum Podcast Artikel 5. Schön, dass ihr da seid.
Aus aktuellem Anlass widmen wir uns heute noch einmal den USA, legen dabei aber den Fokus auf den Widerstand gegen die Trump-Administration und die No Kings-Proteste sowie die anstehenden Midterm-Elections. Dazu haben wir uns heute einen Gast ins Podcast-Studio geholt, unsere Dozentin für Englisch Leigh Love. Herzlich willkommen. Seit 1997 arbeiten sie an der Hochschule Magdeburg-Stendal. Zuvor haben sie in den USA einen Bachelor in Ökonomie und einen Master in Geschichte absolviert. Ihre frühe Kindheit verbrachten sie in Westafrika und Puerto Rico. Während ihrer Teenagerjahre kamen sie aber zurück in ihren Geburtsstaat Oklahoma, lebten zeitweise auch im nördlichen Teil des Bundesstaats New York. Heute sitzen sie mit uns im Podcaststudio und werden mit Viktor, Emilia und Jendrik über die Situation in den USA sprechen. Wir freuen uns sehr darüber.
Das Interview führen wir zwar auf Englisch, aber die wichtigsten Aussagen von Miss Love werden wir am Ende nochmal auf Deutsch zusammenfassen. Okay, let's switch to English right now. We just kind of want to start a bit on the emotional side. So, what are you feeling right now when you think in general about the USA?
Oh, frightened. I think that that's probably summing it up the best. And sad, because I had always intended to go back to the United States, and now I am definitely not going back. And so, frightened and sad, I guess that sums it up the best.
Yes, so you're going to actually stay after your retirement because this is your last year here at the university, so you're going to stay here in Germany?
I am. I'm moving to Oldenburg. And and that's why I have to practice the moin moin.
That's interesting.
That's actually quite interesting because I was born in Oldenburg and raised just
there.
You have family there?
Yeah.
Oh, so okay. So you have to give me all of the tips.
Do you still have a feeling of hopefulness that the current situation is going to turn out better?
I think that that's probably one of the fundamental characteristics of all Americans, although I'm still optimistic. I do personally feel that at some point we will come back. The only thing that I'm really worried about is that just so much has been broken. How long it's going to take for the United States to recover. I don't see the United States, at least not in the near future, being a country that people would look up to and respect. And I think that they have, or at least the Trump administration has forfeited that, which is unfortunate because regardless of how critical I am of the United States has been a very important symbol of democracy. And I think that it's going to take quite some time for that image to be recovered, if at all.
And how would you describe the current mood amongst US citizens in general?
I think one of the things that we always have to remember is that not everybody is into politics like we are. And I think most Americans right now are also frightened. I recently read, so Gallup poll in the United States for the past 20 years has been asking the same question. And the question is always, how do you see yourself 5 years from now? And in the past, it's always been really good. The end of last year, before all of these things started with Iran and everything, only 59% of the people said that they are really excited and looking forward to the future. And for Americans, that's a really small number. Less than 60% are excited about the future. And so I think that there's just a lot of concern. We talk usually about kitchen table issues. So what you would talk to people about at your family around the kitchen table. It's just sort of how are we going to pay the rent? How are we going to pay our heating bills? In the United States, since the war in Iran began, gasoline prices have gone up 50%. How are we going to get to work? If I can't get to work, am I going to have a job? Am I going to lose my job? And so I think all of these issues right now, and just the fact that a lot of people who voted for Donald Trump voted for him because he said, I don't want us to be involved in wars anymore. And immediately goes out and starts a war that most Americans are opposed to. And so there's a lot of frustration, there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of fear. But I still think in the long run, and a lot of people I work with always say the same thing, it's just this overwhelming optimism. And I think when you're amongst, I was just there in the States, and when you're amongst Americans, that's always the case, that they're just optimistic.
Yeah.
Do you think that this will motivate more of Americans to vote again? America has also the problem that many of the voters are actually not voting, or just, voting who screams the loudest, maybe. And do you think that this current situation of this crisis will motivate more of them to actually look more into politics, to think about the current problems and maybe try to make a difference?
I think it depends on who you are. Democrats pretty much in general have said that they will walk barefoot across broken glass to vote in the midterm elections, because they're so keen on getting the Republicans out of, or at least no longer in control. The MAGA Trumpers will definitely vote because they're supporting him. The people who might vote by not voting is what we would say, or people we would call like the one pollster called them the normie Republicans. So just the average Republican, conservative, they might not vote just because they don't know who to vote for. They don't want to vote for the Democrat, but they also don't want to vote to support Trump. So I do think that there will be a large turnout of Democrats, but I think right now all of the gerrymandering that's going on and the most recent Supreme Court decision that will basically turn some states in the South into all red states. I can imagine that will frustrate a lot of people. For example, I vote in Florida, and now the entire state of Florida will be red. And so my vote is not going to change anything because of the gerrymandering. And so I can imagine that might turn off some voters. But I think that a lot of Democrats will turn out.
Just because you now mentioned the midterms, what do you kind of think the midterms have to offer? Like, what chances do they offer? And just to clear up for our listeners what the midterms are, they happen every 2 years, right? And the Americans elect 435 seats in the House of Representatives and a third of the Senate. And every state is in the Senate is represented by 2 senators, and when they are in office, they have an important oversight body opposite to the president. And the election this fall in the middle of the term of office of the president, and which is why they are called midterm elections. So now to you, what do you think they offer?
Before this most recent Supreme Court decision, I thought that the Democrats had a very good chance of taking the House back, meaning that they would be in the majority, a slight majority, and maybe even a chance of taking the Senate. With this last decision, however, it's up in the air. The only thing that we're starting to see, and it's actually really a little sad. I'm personally a big fan of Michelle Obama, and I've always loved the slogan, "When they go low, we go high." But at this point, it just seems like gloves are off, and that we are taking no prisoners. And so if the Republicans gerrymander in their states, then Democrats are going to do it in their states. And it's just going to escalate to a point where we can't work together anymore. But to answer your question, I don't know. I was very optimistic. I think it's going to have a lot to do with voter turnout. If the more typical Republicans, not the MAGA Republicans, if they don't vote because they don't like the candidates, because most of the candidates support Donald Trump, if they don't vote, if the independents don't vote, then maybe we have a chance. But it's going to depend on a lot of factors. And right now, I think the chances are fewer than they had been before this decision.
And also, I think a plus to that problem is that the president is ruling by decree, so he's not really using the Congress or
he's not obeying the Constitution, we could almost say, because he's trying to be the executive and the legislative at the same time.
Yeah, he's not setting the rules. He likes to enforce in front of the Congress to ratify them. So probably if they really win this midterm elections, the Democrats, there's also the problem that maybe that doesn't change anything because he just doesn't care about the Congress at all or the Senate.
Absolutely. There are certain things, for example, right now, that he's able to get away with because the Republicans are in the majority. Last Friday was the end of the 60-day time limit for declaring war in Iran. And the Republicans in Congress are not preventing him from doing that. I think if the Democrats were in control, that they could force him to say, okay, we are ending the war or we are not. But you're absolutely right. And he can also veto anything that Congress passes. And even if the Democrats win, I don't think that they're going to have enough votes to overturn a veto. That would be 2/3, and that's really hard. That means that we'd have to get Republicans on their side. I don't see that happening. So you're right. I think the only reason that this is really important that the Democrats win is just to stop him from doing all of these insane things that the Republicans are letting him do. For example, if we just talk about ICE, all of those things that are happening. And even though 2/3 of the Americans don't like what ICE is doing, and that means Republicans don't like it either, they're just afraid to try and stop him. So I think if the Democrats at least win the House, they can prevent him from just doing whatever he wants. That would, for me, would be a victory.
Well, on the positive side, there were also many protests in early 2026 against Trump, namely No Kings. And we have prepared a short fact check for that.
The so-called No Kings-Protests first started in June 2025, roughly 5 months after President Trump was inaugurated for a second term, and participants across the US criticized his policies as more like those of a tyrant rather than a democratically elected president. Following another series of protests in October last year, a further wave occurred in March of this year, and especially during the protests a few weeks ago, a variety of claims were made. The ongoing Iran war and military spending seemed to be the key aspects, yet other topics such as the Epstein files, ISIS actions, or rising costs of living were also present. And Trump reacted to the criticism by saying he was neither a fascist nor a dictator, and yet he went on to post an AI-generated image of himself wearing a crown. And yet the protests are surely one of the most attended mass rallies in US history, and according to organizers, approximately 8 to 9 million people nationwide participated in the protests in late March.
So now, in the USA, those protests were like huge, and I think everyone like heard of them. But in Germany, the situation was a little bit different. So, like, would you tell us a little bit about how present those protests were in the German media and maybe also in comparison to the US media?
I think on the one hand, we have to remember that, so the protest on March 28th, that pretty much coincided with the war in Iran. And so I actually went back and rewatched the Tagesschau from that date. And they started off with the war in Iran, how it's going to affect Germany, Chancellor Merz criticizing the war, and then they mentioned No Kings. And so I personally thought that that was fine. I mean, when we look at the news values, obviously Germany is going to focus on those stories that are most important for German viewers.
Of course, yeah.
And so I thought that the mentioning of the No Kings after those top stories was fine. You know, obviously this is going to be more important for American viewers. And I think, of course, one of the advantages nowadays, having so many sites that we can use, so many resources, if I want the information, it's there. And I think the same is the case in the United States. If I want to inform myself, I can. It's just the question of, is this important for me? For me, what was so important about American coverage was the fact that quite a lot of time was devoted to talking about this and talking about the issues. And especially the fact that every state in the United States had at least one big protest. And that means in red states as well. And so I wasn't surprised that Germany didn't cover it that much. I think I've mentioned this already in class as well. Germans saying, well, why aren't Americans doing anything? Why aren't Americans doing anything? And I think it's the fact that obviously they're not getting the coverage that Americans are getting. And on the other hand, some people are simply frightened. My brother's stepdaughter wanted to go to a protest in a tiny little town in upstate New York and was afraid to do so because of threatened violence. But the thing about the protests themselves is they are largely peaceful. And one of the things I always think is very ironic is that Mr. Trump says these No Kings-Protests ultimately led to the assassination attempt last month at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. And then when he talks about January 6th and the storm on the Capitol, he calls that a day of love, which for me is just twisting the facts. And so, but getting back to the original question, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm not surprised that Germany didn't cover it more, but once again, the information is there. If Germans are interested in it, they can read more about it. And I think that any news organization always has to weigh those news values and go, we've got this much time, what are we going to cover? And I think the fact that since the war in Iran had just started, that they mentioned it, showed pictures, was already significant.
You just mentioned that these protests also took place in red states, and we thought it was pretty interesting to know how the protests are seen in those red states and among Republican voters as well.
My aunt is the coordinator for the Democratic chapter, where she lives outside of Dallas, Texas. And she was not afraid, but there would people would drive by and shout at them and say awful things. But there's also people who are very supportive, and so I think just the fact that this is becoming more accepted and that there's more people attending these protests and people who would never have done it before, that's very encouraging for me. And just in tiny little towns across the country where they would never have done this in the past. But yeah, and I think that's one of the biggest problems of the U.S. system, is that we've got these two parties where everybody, these big tent parties where everybody is part of the Republican Party, even if they hate Donald Trump. We've got never Trumpers in the Republican Party who would never vote for Donald Trump. But on the other hand, some of them didn't want to vote for Kamala Harris. And so we have that problem, is that many Republicans right now, unless they're MAGA Republicans, don't feel like they're represented. And when a Republican politician tries to stand up to Mr. Trump, then Mr. Trump basically takes them out. This happened just recently. We had the primaries in Indiana and Ohio, and all of the people in Indiana who didn't support Mr. Trump, they're gone. Because the MAGA Trumpers, they're going to vote regardless. And the Republicans who are not happy, they might stay home. And so what we're probably going to end up with is this country becoming more and more polarized, more than it is now.
You said that Trump twists facts, turns them into his own reality, and thus fools the media, fools everybody who's trying to inform themselves on the issue. So what do you think about the current actions of the Democrats against that problem? So do they do enough fact-checking? You have on the other side this leader of the Republican movement who has a lot of authority to his name, sadly, and so you need a lot of authority on the other side too to counter that. We have seen Bernie Sanders' movement against oligarchy. This was very powerful, but this is like the only thing that we in Germany really heard of. Is there more to that?
I think the problem is that if people aren't consuming the news that's fact-checked, that's trying to get the truth, that it's not going to change anything. And I think that that's a little bit of the problem. I know, all of these echo chambers, filter bubbles, obviously the news is out there and people can access it. But the problem is am I willing to believe it? The simple fact that a majority of Republican voters still think Donald Trump won in 2020, for me says it all. That's been fact-checked backwards and forwards, up and down, and they still don't believe it. And so if I am, if I've bought into this ideology, it doesn't matter what the other side says.
Yeah, closed bubbles.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter.
And that I think right now is the problem. I think what the people that the Democrats need to reach are the people that are still open to the idea. I think a lot of people rejected Kamala Harris because they thought, okay, this is being forced down our throats. We didn't vote for her. We voted for Joe Biden. Now we find out Joe Biden is not really what we thought he was. And so a lot of frustration amongst Democratic voters. But on the other hand, independent voters not knowing who to vote for. So I think the ones that we can and should reach are the ones that are still open. And yeah, it involves a lot of convincing, for sure. And I appreciate what Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York, what they're doing. And I think Democrats just have to realize that people they want some sort of normalcy back in their life. They don't want to have ICE come and take away their neighbor. They don't want ICE to be shooting people. They don't want gasoline prices to be going up 50%. All of these things this is not what they want. And keeping in mind, once again, not everybody's into politics.
Maybe this is already seen in the current situation in New York with Mamdani. He has a lot of success and it's going really well for him. So maybe in other states, when there are people like him too, maybe that's going to be a lot of reason to hope again for the system.
For sure, but of course New York City's special.
Yeah, that's
but I feel like
thing.
He's like a symbol of showing that the Democratic Party can still be a sufficiently strong opponent.
I agree completely.
Mm-hmm. Coming back to Trump, and I think we already spoke about this in class a bit, of him saying that he wants to stay in office for way longer than he should or that he can. So do you have a personal view on Trump potentially trying to stay in office for even a third term?
Yes. I just recently was watching, so in the United States, the president nominates judges, federal judges. And so the 3 judges that he nominated, they had to go in front of the Senate to be confirmed. And one of the questions that they asked was, do you know what the 22nd Amendment to the Constitution is? And the 22nd Amendment says that you can only serve 2 terms as president. And all 3 of the candidates said, never heard of it. And so then the senator said, it's really short, this is all it says. And they said, so if you become a judge, would you support Mr. Trump running for a 3rd term? And they all said something like, I would have to fact check that. And so I think right now the problem is that we rely very much on the judicial branch to make decisions that the legislative branch, Congress, should be making. And so if Mr. Trump gets enough judges in office that support his idea, and if the Republicans are still in the majority, who knows? But if he does run for Congress, God, that would be awful. If he ran again for president, I really think that, I mean, we'll be talking about a constitutional crisis at the end of this semester, but I think that really could trigger a complete meltdown of democracy in the United States. And I hope not. I think just the fact that he's so old and that he's basically like falling apart in front of our eyes.
He's very sick.
Yeah, I think that might stop him, but we'll have to wait and see.
But on that note, when he is very old and he probably wouldn't make a third term, you really have the problem that he has a lot of power to his name, also in the Republic Party, and when he's gone, then there's like this vacuum of power. And it's really interesting to think about who is going to take that power in that vacuum. And maybe when you think about J.D. Vance, a lot of people say that he doesn't have the courage or the image to really do that. I think that the problem is maybe. Do you think it's possible that J.D. Vance can continue his legacy, or will his legacy die with him?
Yeah, this is what we would call the cult of personality, for sure. When Trump is gone, many of the people will no longer support somebody like J.D. Vance, and I think then there is the possibility of the normie Republicans coming back, and it seems like they're tending to support Marco Rubio more than J.D. Vance, and that's of course always a little bit of the problem when you're vice president. If the president isn't behind you 100%, and of course Mr. Trump is only behind Mr. Trump, then it's very difficult for a vice president to be successful. Like I said, I mean, if he does run again, and if he is reelected, then basically democracy in the United States is at death's door. And then I don't think we really need to worry who comes next. I think then what we really need to worry about is how do we get democracy back.
Yeah, and for this reason, it's always good to have a strong constitution to back up this democracy that you're trying to protect. So, do you think that the constitution in the United States is able to withstand that problem? I mean, we also have it here in Germany, not as serious, but it's getting there. So do you think that the constitution is hindering necessary reforms, is too old maybe?
I think definitely in some respects it is too old. It's definitely out of date. But I think the real problem is just that it's not being respected the way that it was written. I don't know if it would necessarily make that big of a difference if we had a new constitution, but I think that if each branch respected what was in the Constitution, we wouldn't be facing the problems that we're facing right now. And the thing is that Congress was not supposed to be working closely with the president. Unfortunately, I mean, we're not set up like a parliament, which would be better. And there has been discussion about ending the Electoral College, having a fairer way of selecting president. But the way that it's set up now, unless we're respecting the institutions, and that's what we're not doing, people no longer have faith in our institutions. They don't have confidence in the government. They don't have confidence in the media. They don't have confidence in law enforcement, police, anything. And until we start having confidence in our institutions, at this point, I don't think that changing the Constitution is going to make a difference. Definitely, yeah. I would much prefer to have a parliamentary system. I think it makes much more sense. The Electoral College is ridiculous. It's unfair. But there's always going to be people who protect their power because they want to stay in power. And I mean, if we just look at the Congress, the way that it's set up now, especially if you're in the House of Representatives, you get elected and you're in office for 2 years. That means basically you get elected and the very next day you start running for office again. And instead of focusing on passing laws and getting things done, you focus on getting reelected. And that is a problem. Yeah. So I definitely would love to have a different constitution, but I think right now we have other problems that are much more serious.
Yeah.
So would you say you're more a fan of like the German
I've always been a
politics?
fan of a parliamentary system, regardless which country. I mean, some work better than others, obviously, because with a parliament, if you do end up having a coalition, you're forced to compromise before you form the government. In the United States, it's the other way around, and as we're seeing, it doesn't work. And so that you're forced to compromise after the government's already in place. And right now, compromise is a dirty word in American politics. You don't compromise, it means you're weak. And we don't have like a real budget in the United States right now. The government is just now starting to get reopened once again entirely. It's just madness and chaos. Because, I mean, of course, the Grand Coalition here in Germany is also not working wonderfully. But at least they had a plan before they started governing. And if it falls apart, there's an immediate new election. That would not happen in the United States. We have elections, and they're written in the Constitution when they take place, and it's the first Tuesday in November, period. And here it's just more logical that you respond to the situation and that you say, okay, this isn't working, new elections. Of course, right now, having a new election would probably not be a great idea in Germany. And so hopefully the Grand Coalition will start working together again.
Yeah, well, that's part of the problem, why our constitution is also under attack. But you said that you really like the parliament system. Do you think that the two-party system in America is hindering the political discourse in the country? Or would you like to have like a multiple party system like here in Europe, or mostly?
Yeah, definitely. I think the problem that we have with our electoral college system is the fact that in most of the states it's this winner-take-all system. And so even if you've got a strong Green Party candidate, they're often stronger Green Party candidates, they're told you should not run because you're going to take votes away from the Democrats. And I find that unfair, but the way that our system is set up, it's true. It's a fact. When we have a third party candidate running for president, they will take votes from one party or the other. And that is, for example, when Ralph Nader was running as the Green Party, he's a famous politician that you don't know, I know. But it basically meant that it made it almost impossible for Al Gore to win, and that's why we got George W. Bush. And so, yeah, definitely it would make more sense to have more parties where instead of making compromises, so for example, if I am a Republican from the state of Massachusetts, I probably have more in common with a Democrat from Texas than with a Republican from Texas. And that just doesn't make any sense. So we should have more parties that really reflect our values and not just say, okay, I'm going to vote for the Democrats because they're better than the Republicans, even if I don't like everything that they're doing. And my focus is going to be more on environmental issues. And then, of course, I prefer to vote for the Greens. But, yeah, our system.
We have one last question. And that is, could you please explain to us how you managed to remain optimistic about the future given the situation? Like, could you explain that to us in German for once?
Gerne. Ich persönlich bin der Meinung, dass man darf nie zynisch werden und man darf nie aufgeben, weil das bringt nichts. Ich kann nur was ändern, wenn ich optimistisch bleibe. Das heißt nicht, dass ich Tage habe, wo ich verzweifle, gibt es immer wieder, wo ich denke, ich kann nichts ändern, aber das nützt nichts. Man muss aufstehen und sagen, ich muss was tun. Ich kann einfach nicht aufgeben, weil dann hat Trump gewonnen und das lasse ich einfach nicht zu.
Thank you for taking your time with us today and talking about the political crisis in the US. We appreciate you giving us your thoughts and views. And now we are just going to summarize our talk in German.
So, das war ein spannendes Interview. Ihr habt es geführt. Erstmal Gratulation an euch. Habt das wirklich toll gemacht. Ich habe in der Ecke gestanden, ein paar Bilder gemacht, mir auch einige Notizen aufgeschrieben. Aber erstmal die Frage an euch. Wie habt ihr es wahrgenommen? Was sind für euch die wichtigsten Punkte, die ihr jetzt mitnehmt aus diesem Gespräch?
Also ich fand ihre Einblicke sehr spannend. Vor allem, dass sie auch ein bisschen von ihrer Familie und ihren Freunden erzählt hat, wie die eben die Situation aufnehmen, wie sie damit umgehen. Und ich finde es sehr bezeichnend, dass sie gesagt hat, dass sie nicht zurückkehren wird.
Gleich am Anfang. Ja,
zumindest nicht, genau.
Die Frage stand eigentlich ganz am Ende.
Ja, in unserem Skript stand die Frage am Ende, von wegen, würden sie nach der Rente wieder zurück in die USA kehren, aber dass sie direkt gesagt hat, nein, ich bleibe in Deutschland.
Auch also allein der Punkt, dass sie das sofort an den Anfang gestellt hat, ich werde dorthin nicht zurückkehren. Noch bezeichnender, dass sie dann in Oldenburg bleiben will. Ihr werdet euch dann wahrscheinlich mal begegnen, Jendrik. Ne?
Ja, einfach durch Oldenburg laufen und man läuft einfach ein bisschen Love über den Weg.
Ja.
Wäre
sehr
schon lustig.
Ja.
Viktor, was sind für dich die wichtigsten Punkte? Was hast du dir mitgenommen?
Also, ich fand sehr interessant, dass sie trotz dessen, dass sie nicht zurückkehren will, immer noch positiv bleibt und auf jeden Fall auch sagt, dass man nicht zynisch werden sollte, weil das ist heutzutage eigentlich so der Hauptgrund für den Tod des Diskurses, eben dass entweder die eine Seite so sehr in ihrer Filterblase ist, dass sie keinen Bock mehr hat und die andere Seite ist so zynisch, dass sie auch keinen Bock mehr hat und dann haben alle kollektiv keinen Bock mehr und das ist dann schwierig für eine Demokratie. Und ich finde aber auch, dass sie trotz dessen eine Angst mit sich trägt oder eine Traurigkeit gegenüber dem, was sich gerade so da entwickelt, finde ich, ist angebracht und richtig und auch viele sagen dann hat man, also viele sagen ja, man zieht sich in seine Furcht zurück oder so, aber ich finde, Angst in so einem Fall ist der erste Schritt dahin, dass man anfängt darüber nachzudenken, wie man es besser machen könnte und da haben wir ja auch schon darüber geredet, wie man es besser machen kann.
Und es war ja im Grunde ein Plädoyer für die Demokratie, was sie hier gehalten hat. Ich fand auch sehr spannend den Punkt, wie sie beschrieben hat, dass die USA immer mehr polarisiert, dass die Ränder immer stärker werden und der Diskurs kaputt geht. Und vor allem, wie sie auf diese Wahl geblickt hat. In dem Zusammenhang ist der Begriff Gerrymandering gefallen. Vielleicht müssen wir den an der Stelle nochmal kurz erklären.
Ja, also ganz kurz zusammengefasst ist das eigentlich nichts anderes als das Zuschneiden von Wahlkreisen für die eigenen politischen Vorteile.
Was im Grunde schon sehr viel über das amerikanische Wahlsystem aussagt, dass man einfach Wahlkreise nach Belieben zuschneiden kann, um bessere Stimmergebnisse am Ende zu erzielen.
Ja, ich sag mal, bei uns wird jede Wahlkreisreform, egal auf was für einer Ebene, gefühlt 2 Jahre lang sorgsam vorbereitet und alle möglichen Leute haben da irgendwelche Einwände für. Und in den USA ist man da scheinbar etwas schmerzloser, möchte ich mal sagen.
Ja. Das Einzige, was du bei uns machen kannst, ist den Wahlkreis zu wechseln als Politiker, aber ansonsten gibt es da wenig Spielräume. Das ist da bei denen anders. Aber was nehmt ihr euch mit von dem Punkt, als sie über die Umstrukturierung der USA von einer Demokratie zu einem Staat mit diktatorischen Zügen gesprochen hat, von der Umstrukturierung des amerikanischen Rechtssystems und Politiksystems?
Also sie hat ja wortwörtlich gesagt, dass wenn es so weit kommt, dass die Verfassung geändert werden wird oder missachtet wird, wird sie ja jetzt schon, aber halt in einem Maße, in dem es eigentlich so gesehen nicht mehr vertretbar ist, dass man überhaupt noch von der Existenz ihrer selbst sprechen könnte, dass die Demokratie in den USA vor einer dunklen Phase steht, wenn nicht sogar vor dem Aus, wie sie gesagt hat. Und daher hat sie ja auch in dem Zusammenhang gesagt, dass die Gefahr immer größer wird, dadurch, dass immer mehr Richter im Supreme Court eben für Trump sind, pro-Trump Administration. Und da hat sie auch gesagt, dass in einer offiziellen Anhörung die potenziellen Anwärter für dieses neue Amt eben alle pro-Trump eben gesagt haben, ja, wir kennen dieses 26. Amendment nicht, das eben Trump...
22.
Das 22. Amendment, nicht eben, dass keine dritte Präsidentschaft möglich ist für Trump. Und wenn man diese einfache Regel eben als non-existent betrachtet oder nicht wichtig, dann steht dem jetzigen Präsidenten eben alles offen und er ist eigentlich nur noch limitiert durch seine eigene Gesundheit. Und wenn das die einzige Hoffnung ist für eine Demokratie oder für das Halten einer Verfassung,
dann sieht es düster aus.
Dann würde ich mir ernsthafte Gedanken machen.
Vor allem, weil sie hat das ja sehr bildlich ausgedrückt. Also ich weiß nicht mehr, was genau der Wortlaut war, aber er fällt quasi schon in sich zusammen. Er ist schon so alt, dass es eigentlich nicht mehr machen kann. Aber wir sehen ja, dass selbst wenn dieser Fall eintreten sollte, Trump aus gesundheitlichen Gründen das nicht bis zum Ende durchführen kann, die Lage keine bessere wird, weil dann ein J.D. Vance direkt dahinter steht und hinter ihm...
Naja, aber da hatte sie ja auch gesagt, dass sie J.D. Vance nicht als nächsten Trump quasi sieht.
Ja, sie
Damit,
nicht, aber ich persönlich würde das zum Beispiel anders bewerten.
Tatsächlich ist es in den USA, die meisten in der Bevölkerung sehen J.D. Vance nicht als möglichen Kandidaten an, weil ihm wird nachgesagt, dass er kein Rückgrat hat, dass er nicht stark genug ist.
Seit wann ist in den USA Rückgrat wichtig? Jetzt mal ehrlich.
Also eins muss man Trump lassen, der hat Rückgrat. Und das ist das Problem. Der macht, was er will. Und das ist das Problem. Vance ist eigentlich ein Opportunist. Alles mit dem Trump sich umgibt, das sind meist Opportunisten. Ich meine, Vance, der war früher... Der ist aus dem Hinterland gekommen, hat sich hochgearbeitet durch irgendwie seine Ausbildung an der Universität, hat ein Buch darüber geschrieben, warum man eigentlich anders denken sollte, warum man eigentlich liberaler denken sollte, und jetzt ist er auf der ganz anderen Seite des Spektrums. Also diese Entwicklung allein zeugt eigentlich von keinerlei Rückgrat.
Aber ich würde sagen, dass er ein Zwecksopportunist ist, weil er ist auch einer der wenigen, der den Iran-Krieg nicht mitträgt an sich. Er hat sich als einer der wenigen in Trumps Regiment gegen den Iran-Krieg geäußert. Natürlich, er ist gefangen in diesem System, er muss sich jetzt hinter den Präsidenten stellen, aber er war keiner, der gesagt hat, wir machen das, sondern er hat sogar gesagt, schwierig, wenn wir America First fordern, dann können wir nicht hier in den Iran einmarschieren.
Ja, aber trotz dessen ist Vance, man muss immer noch beachten, dass Trump einen riesigen Personalitätsmythos um sich herum aufgebaut hat und dass, wenn dieser Mythos wegfällt, wenn Trump wegfällt, dann ist da dieses Machtvakuum, was wir auch schon angesprochen hatten. Das hat es ja auch bestätigt, dass dieses Machtvakuum da sein wird. Und die Sache ist, dass die meisten Amerikaner eher Marco Rubio als nächstpotenziellen Kandidaten sehen. Und der ist im Prinzip genauso schlimm. Also da stellt sich eigentlich nur noch die Frage...
Er hat auch kein Rückgrat. Ich meine, er trägt die großen Schuhe, die Trump ihm geschenkt hat, anstatt ihm einfach zu sagen, wir sind mir eine Größe zu groß. Also
ja, aber das ist ja genau der Punkt. Die Frage ist, ob diese Leute das Machtvakuum, diese Schuhe, wie du sagst, von Trump eben übernehmen können. Oder ob seine Taten eben mit ihm dann sterben. Und daher würde ich sagen, dass Vance speziell hat keinerlei Chancen auf eine mögliche Wiederwahl, finde ich. Weil die Beliebtheitswerte von ihm sind einfach da eher Marco Rubio. Und selbst der hat ein Problem mit Rückgrat.
Ich glaube ich bin anderer Meinung. Leigh Love hat da sicherlich auch einen weitreichenderen Blick drauf. Ich denke, dass mehr möglich ist, als wir uns aktuell vorstellen können. Ich denke auch, dass Vance gefährlicher noch werden könnte als Trump. Aber mal abgesehen davon würde mich abschließend interessieren, wie ihr das Gespräch auf Englisch fandet. Mal ganz persönlich. Wie habt ihr es wahrgenommen, jetzt auf Englisch fast 40 Minuten politisch zu diskutieren?
Anstrengend.
Ungewohnt.
Ja. Aber diskussionswas war es ja nicht eigentlich. Also wir haben ja mehr Fragen gestellt.
Ja, wir hatten einen Fragenkatalog, wir waren vorbereitet. Wir sind ein bisschen rumgesprungen, deswegen war es an manchen Stellen mehr improvisiert als an anderen. Aber ich würde sagen, mit unserer Englisch-Dozentin eigentlich auch eine ganz gute erste Übung.
Ja.
Würde ich auch sagen. Also so am Anfang hat es so ein bisschen gebraucht, um reinzukommen, aber ich würde sagen, das ist relativ normal. Und dann lief es irgendwann und dann war es auch gut, würde ich sagen.
Ja, und grundsätzlich unser erster Studiogast.
Ja.
Fand ich spannend.
Alle bisherigen Gäste haben wir quasi extern mobil besucht. Das war jetzt eine Premiere. Und meinerseits kann ich euch sagen, ihr habt das echt toll gemacht. Und in diesem Sinne freue ich mich, dass wir das auch mal ausprobiert haben hier im Rahmen dieses Podcasts und freue mich auf alle weiteren Projekte.
Gerne könnt ihr natürlich in den Kommentaren oder auch auf unseren Social-Media-Plattformen mitdiskutieren. Wenn ihr nämlich noch ein bisschen mehr von uns sehen wollt, dann schaut einmal auf Instagram und TikTok vorbei. Dort heißen wir Artikel 5-Podcast.
Bye, bye! Ist euch aufgefallen, dass jedes Mal, wenn man hier unten rankommt, das Mikro nicht mehr mitmacht? Hier unten an diesem Holzding.
Oh ja.
Da ist ein Mechanismus eingebaut, dass wenn die da draufhängen, dass das sofort aussieht.
Ach, stimmt.
Das ist krass. Ich darf da nicht reinkommen. Das ist unangenehm.
Ist da jemand irgendwann mal aus Versehen gegengekommen?